This is LING 270, Language, Technology, and Society, Module 3, Decipherment. In this lesson, we'll talk about the decipherment of Egyptian hieroglyphics. Egyptian hieroglyphics is a really famous example of decipherment, and in this set of video lectures, I've included a part of a documentary where Carl Sagan explains the process of decipherment. It reviews a lot of what we talked about in the textbook, and I'll review a lot of the findings that he talked about here. So what you should have seen in this video is how a key way that the decipherment of Egyptian hieroglyphics unfolded was noticing that there are a lot of hieroglyphics which occur in these special envelopes, which were called cartouches. And the assumption was made that these cartouches represent names. They're a way of highlighting and honoring a certain part of the text, which referred to royal people. What we can notice is that a lot of these symbols tend to repeat in similar kinds of places. And similarly, we can notice that although we have these hieroglyphs are really iconic looking, they look very much like real objects. But when we look at their frequency, we can see that there are a small number of symbols that occur very frequently in the text. So that's kind of a sign that this isn't really an ideographic or a logographic writing system, that in fact these symbols probably represent sounds information. And as Grotefend had done when deciphering Old Persian, you can make the assumption that each of these symbols represents sound, and you can start by assuming that these names refer to famous kings or queens in this case. So a beginning of the decipherment of Egyptian hieroglyphics assumed that these two names refer to Ptolemaios and Cleopatra. And we can see how when we make those sound assumptions, we can see that those sounds repeat in certain places. That shows that we're on the right track for the decipherment. One major archaeologist who had worked on the decipherment of Egyptian hieroglyphics was Thomas Young. And he made his decipherment based on the Philae obelisk, which was originally found in Egypt, but today it can be found in England. So he made the notice that there were these cartouches on the in the set of hieroglyphs, and he made the assumption that they would be referred to names. Now, initially, he assumed that they were used to mark foreign names, but in fact, we know that they are actually used to mark any name, and we know this as the decipherment of Egyptian hieroglyphs had progressed. And we also know now that there are extra factors in the cartouche besides the name, as we talked about in the video, that there are some kind of honorific phrases in the cartouche as well. But nonetheless, the assumption that these cartouches represent names was a really good really good starting point for doing this kind of decipherment. So we can see that we can start a decipherment even with an obelisk like this, just looking at that kind of inscription and making educated guesses like this. Now, what was really instrumental for the decipherment of Egyptian hieroglyphics was the finding of the Rosetta Stone. Rosetta Stone is probably a term that many of you are familiar with the language learning software. It's based on this kind of bilingual text here, which was really important for the decipherment of Egyptian hieroglyphics. What the stone is it is a royal decree from 196 BC, which was written in ancient Greek and also in the hieroglyphic script and in the Demotic script. So, which was a kind of simplified writing system of the hieroglyphic system, but with just a kind of simplified script. It was discovered during Napoleon's Egyptian campaign when Napoleon had led an invasion of Egypt, and some scientists that he had brought with him had discovered this major artifact. Now, today you can find this artifact in the British Museum, however. And decipherers who examined this kind of text here made the assumption that these three stripes of text probably represent the same text, just translated into different languages. And this is really helpful because since part of the inscription is in ancient Greek, that's a language that we are very familiar with. Even it was very well spoken. And that kind of information would be very, very helpful for deciphering another language. The way that we were able to do this is to notice that there are, this was really helpful because we can look for names in the Greek text and then look for cartouches in the hieroglyphic text and try to work out the sound correspondences between the two. Remember that the names of people, the sounds tend to be the same, even if they're in different languages. So for that reason, names are a really important beginning point for decipherment. So that's why the Rosetta Stone, and in general, bilingual texts are very, very important in a process of decipherment. Champollion, a French archaeologist, was able to begin a decipherment based on the kind of correspondences which could be found in the Rosetta Stone. For one thing, he observed that there were many more hieroglyphic symbols than there are in words in the Greek text of the Rosetta Stone. So he noticed although these symbols, as I mentioned before, they look very ideographic, since there's so many of them and since they repeat so much, that kind of suggests that it would be more like an alphabet instead of a logography. That's why Champollion concluded that these symbols represent sounds such as consonants and vowels. And he examined the two texts to look for all these correspondences which we can find between the Greek text and the corresponding hieroglyphic. And here you can see them laid out nicely in a table where all the hieroglyphs which correspond to each Greek letter, and this is basically a very major advancement in the decipherment of Egyptian hieroglyphics. And as the decipherment kind of gets underway, you can notice some kind of patterns which tend to come up. Another thing that Champollion used, besides this kind of process of comparison, of seeing how Greek letters correspond to hieroglyphic symbols, he also tried to use the acrophonic principle to the decipherment. So remember, the acrophonic principle was the strategy used where a symbol represents the first sound of an object's name. So if you look at a picture of an ibis, and you know how the word ibis was pronounced in the ancient Egyptian language, you could assume that that is what the first sound of that word is, and that's what that symbol represents. So he made an educated assumption that the ancient Egyptian language is related to a language that is spoken in the area prior to the arrival of Arabic-speaking people. So he assumed that ancient Egyptian is related to the modern Coptic language, and that's how he used to start this process of using the acrophonic principle to decipher these symbols. So the Coptic word for sun, for example, is Re, and you can see that the symbol in the top picture on the left is pretty reminiscent of a sun. So he made the assumption that this symbol might represent the sound R. And based on some correspondences we find in the Rosetta Stone, we can see that S corresponds with the cane symbol. So that means that this the symbols at the top here represent R blank SS. And remember from when we did the cryptography cryptogram puzzle at the beginning of this module, it's very easy to fill in the blank of a word if we already have a lot of the other sounds figured out. And we know that in ancient Egypt, there was a king named Ramses. So that's probably what this sound represents here. That's probably what that symbol in the middle likely represents. Now once we've deciphered those symbols at the top, the sun is an R, the branches is an M, and the canes are an S. We can start other pieces of the decipherment start to fall into place. So we can see that there's a picture of an ibis followed by M and S. And we know that there's another king in ancient Egypt called Thutmose. And Thoth was an ancient Egyptian god whose symbol was an ibis. So we can see that these kind of sound pairings kind of lead to other parts of the decipherment falling into place. So yeah, as I said, the god Thoth was associated with ibises. So as these pieces kind of fall into place, that's a good indication that the decipherment is on the right track. So yeah, these are the approaches that were used to decipher the ancient Egyptian hieroglyphic system.